Good day, everyone. I am Ron Marquez, and today I will be discussing the MOYA tree. So, this was created by our beloved professor in civil procedure, Dean Salvador Moya III, and it discusses the jurisdiction of each court here in the Philippines, as well as the jurisdiction of the three constitutional commissions, and also the appealing processes and procedures in civil cases. Now, to formally start our discussion, we first define what is jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is the power of a court to try, hear, and decide a case. This power is not arbitrary, but rather it is conferred by law and even by our Constitution, as evidenced in Article 8 of the 1987 Constitution. For statutory basis, we refer to BP 129 or the Judiciary Organization Act of 1980. So now, we start with the first level courts. The first level courts include metropolitan trial courts, municipal trial courts, and municipal circuit trial courts. In the first level, its jurisdiction is stated in Section 33 of BP 129 as amended. Now we take note of two types of actions. First is personal and second is real. For personal actions, the value required is up to 2 million pesos and below. And for real actions is 400,000 pesos, up to 400,000 pesos and below. But how do we determine the value of a real property? The rules provide for four ways. First is the assessed value, which is to be obtained from the assessor's office, the zonal valuation of the BIR, and third, if these two cannot be obtained, we can refer to the documents executed by the parties. And if this is still absent, we now use the adjoining properties value. Moving on is the rules on expedited procedure. This is still within the same level of MTC. It is divided into two. First, RSP, or the rules on summary procedure, and second is rules on small claims cases. Now, rules on summary procedures are applicable to certain civil cases within jurisdictional thresholds. But more importantly, it is applicable on ejectment cases, which can be found in Rule 70 and could either be forcible entry and unlawful detainer. Forcible entry is possession that is illegal from the very start, as opposed to unlawful detainer. The possession was legal at the start but becomes illegal later on, either through demand or expiration of lease. Now, for rules on summary procedure, judgments are final and executory. In rules on summary procedure, how do we stay an execution? First is to file a notice of appeal and to pay the docket and other lawful fees. This was emphasized in the case of Sun Life Offices Limited versus Asuncion, where the court clarified that filing alone of a case is not gonna perfect an appeal. It should always be accompanied by the payment of docket and other lawful fees. Now, for small claims cases, it's applicable only on purely money claims, and the value must be up to 1 million pesos and below. So, here, the same with RSP, judgments are also final and executory. Now, what is the general rule when it comes to motions in rules on summary procedure? As a general rule, motions for reconsideration are prohibited in rules on summary procedures. But of course, there is an exception provided by jurisprudence. As stated in the case of Ruben versus Court of Appeals, and reiterated in Joven versus Court of Appeals and Lucas versus Fabros, the court held in these cases that a motion for reconsideration is allowed if it pertains to an interlocutory order. What is an interlocutory order? It is an order that does not finally disposes of the case. Meaning there is still something to do, or there is still certain matters of the case that can still be decided on. And that is the jurisdiction of the first level courts. We now go up to the regional trial court, or the RTC. So the same with the first level courts. The value required is also dependent on the type of action being filed. If it is a personal action, the required value now is 2 million pesos and above, which is why we put 2 million plus 1. For real actions, it is 400,000 and above, 400 plus 1. So, the jurisdiction can be found in Section 19 of DP 129 as amended. And we must also take note that the RTC can either exercise original jurisdiction or appellate jurisdiction. If the RTC exercises original jurisdiction, we utilize Rule 41. If it is Rule 42, or if it is acting in its appellate jurisdiction, we use Rule 42. And a famous doctrine that we must also discuss is the Napes doctrine, which was created in the case of Napes versus Court of Appeals. Now, what is this doctrine? This doctrine provides that when a party files a motion for reconsideration or a motion for new trial, and either of those motions are denied by the court, the party is given a fresh period of 15 days to appeal. And it is not the remaining days, not the interrupted time, but a full new 15 days to appeal. So the purpose of this doctrine is to avoid technical injustice for the litigants, and it prevents them from having their appeal rights to be violated due to miscomputation. Now we go up again, the jurisdiction of the Court of Appeals. The jurisdiction of the Court of Appeals is provided in Rule 46, wherein it states there that the original jurisdiction of the Court of Appeals is certiorari, prohibition, mandamus, quo warranto, habeas corpus, and the 3 special rules. Now, the Court of Appeals is known to be the General Appellate Court, and therefore it can be the reviewing court for RTC appeals, quasi-judicial appeals under Rule 43, and special civil actions under Rule 65. Now we go to the left, which is the Sandigan Bayan. So the Sandigan Bayan has 7 divisions. Its jurisdiction is provided for by PD 1606 and Republic Act 10660. So, as stated in this law, Sandigan Bayan now has concurrent jurisdiction with RTC, where it has jurisdiction over public officers with salary grade 27 and above, and crimes committed in relation to public office and violations of Republic Act 3019. And to further expand the explanation of the jurisdiction of Sandigan Bayan, we first discuss the case of De Lima versus Guerrero. So in this case, the exception to the rule of the jurisdiction of the Sandigan Bayan is that if there is no allegations of damages, and if there is damages um, alleged, but the value is below 1 million pesos, then the Sandigan Bayan cannot acquire jurisdiction. It was also stated in this case that once an information is filed, the judge's primary duty is to determine if there is probable cause for the issuance of a warrant of arrest. And this is to prevent further delay of proceedings. In the case of Ampungan versus Sandigan Bayan, in this case, Ampungan was a vice mayor. So, when an information was filed against him, he argued that his salary grade was below 27, and therefore the Sandigan Bayan lacked jurisdiction. But the court held in this case that even if salary grade is being questioned, jurisdiction still attaches if the offense is committed in relation to public office under PD 1606 as amended. Now we move on to the Court of Tax Appeals. The Court of Tax Appeals has 3 divisions, and it has an en banc. Now, its jurisdiction pertains to tax assessments, collections, and criminal tax violations. So its jurisdiction depends on statutory thresholds, but commonly it involves cases with 1 million pesos and above, depending on the case. If it is below 1 million pesos, the jurisdiction belongs to MTC, as provided in the case of People versus Mendez and Bank. Now, we go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is, or rather has 3 divisions as well. It also has an en banc. Now, in the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, we use Rule 45 and Rule 56. 56 if it's the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, and 45 if it is the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. For original jurisdiction, the same with the Court of Appeals, it has original jurisdiction over certiorari, prohibition, mandamus, quo warranto, habeas corpus, and the 3 special rules: writ of amparo, writ of habeas data, and writ of kalikasan. Now, if we are to utilize Rule 45, we can only raise pure questions of law. But the exception to the rule is that, or rather, the exceptions to the rule are writ of amparo, habeas data, and writ of kalikasan. In these cases, we can now raise, through Rule 45, a mixed question of fact and law. So, to further discuss the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, in the case of Laya Jr. versus Philippine Veterans Bank, the court ruled that early retirement programs must be voluntary and not compulsory. In the case of Zonyo versus Quantum Leaf Security Agency, the court held in this case that a motion for reconsideration is not a condition sine qua non, or is not a strict prerequisite for Rule 45. So a party may appeal immediately or after the denial of a motion for reconsideration. So, since we've already discussed the jurisdiction of the regular courts, we now move on to the constitutional commissions. So, we have 3: the Commission on Elections, or COMELEC, the Civil Service Commission, or the CSC, and COA, or Commission on Audit. Now, CSC is the Central Personnel Agency. Out of all three constitutional commissions, only CSC has double appellate review system. Why is that? The reason for that is the existence of the Social Justice Clause, wherein it provides that those who have less in life shall have more in law. So, we use Rule 43 for CSC, and if we are to elevate the case to the Supreme Court, we can use pure questions of law through Rule 45. If there's grave abuse of discretion, we can use that as a ground through Rule 65 in the Court of Appeals. Now we move on to the Commission on Elections. The COMELEC has two divisions, first and second, and also has an en banc. Now the jurisdiction of the first and second divisions pertains to public officials that belongs to national, regional, provincial, and city positions. If the position is only municipal, the jurisdiction belongs to the RTC. If barangay positions, it belongs to the MTC. Now, so for COMELEC, we utilize Rule 64 in relation to Rule 65. And what ground? The ground we use to elevate to the ground that we use is grave abuse of discretion. Now, if we want to elevate it to the Supreme Court, we must first apply for TRO, injunction, and status quo ante order. If we fail to apply for this, the automatic effect is that the decision of the COMELEC en banc would be final and executory. And then lastly, is the Commission on Audit. Now, Commission on Audit is the guardian of public funds. So it has auditor level, director level, and commission proper. It follows the 6 months and 5 days rule. What is this rule? It means that one does not need to wait for the 6 months period to lapse. If it already exceeded 6 months, the party is given 5 days to elevate it to the commission proper if the case is still left undecided. So that is the remedy. The party can elevate it to the commissioner proper. And COA, or the Commission on Audit, is composed of Commissioner 1, Commissioner 2, and the presiding commissioner. And the same with COMELEC. It also utilizes Rules 64 in relation to Rule 65 and uses the ground of grave abuse of discretion. And if you want to elevate it also to the Supreme Court, you apply for TRO, injunction, and status quo ante order. Failure to do so would mean that the judgment of the commissioner proper becomes final and executory. So that concludes the jurisdiction of each court and constitutional commission. We now proceed to the appealing procedure for each court. Now we proceed with the appealing procedure. So, we first start again with the MTC. What is its jurisdiction? First, personal action, 2 million, up to 2 million pesos and below. For real actions, for up to 400,000 pesos and below. That is your basis. Now, suppose you lose in MTC, what is your remedy? Remember, a motion for reconsideration is not prohibited if the case is not covered by the Rules on Summary Procedure or RSP. So you can still file an MR. However, if the case is covered by RSP, motion for reconsideration is prohibited with respect to decisions, resolutions, or final orders. So from the MTC, you go to the RTC. So what should you do? You file a notice of appeal plus payment of docket fees. And this must be done within 15 days. And that completes Rule 40. Now, we go to the jurisdiction of the RTC. For personal actions, it is 2 million and above. For real actions, 400,000 and above. Now, suppose you lose in the regional trial court. Remember, in the NAPIS rule, you are given a fresh period of 15 days to appeal. And then it allows you to go to the Court of Appeals. So what should you do? Again, you file a notice of appeal plus payment again of docket fees. Which is also to be done within 15 days. And that completes Rule 41. Now suppose your case originated from the MTC and was elevated to the RTC. And you lost again. You now want to elevate it to the Court of Appeals. What should you do? You file a petition for review. And how many days you have? You have 15 days. And you might ask if this period is extendable. The answer is yes. It is also extendable to another 15 days. Now, that gives us a total of 30 days. So, in order to obtain the extended 15 days, you must file a motion for extension plus payment again of docket fees. And when should you do this? You should file this motion during the first 15 days. Failure to do so would mean that the decision is already final and executory, which is provided under Rule 39. That completes Rule 42. Now, another common question is, can you go from RTC directly to the Supreme Court? And the answer is yes. But what issue should be raised? The only issue that could be raised if you want to go from RTC directly to the Supreme Court is pure question of law. And can the period be 30 days? Yes, but only in special proceedings or multiple appeals. So, 30 days if special proceedings and multiple appeals. Now, otherwise, if it is a single appeal, the period is strictly 15 days. Again, under Rule 42, 15 days, extendable to 30, provided that you file for a motion for extension and pay within the 15-day period. For Rule 44, it is simply procedural, and Rule 46 applies when the Court of Appeals exercises original jurisdiction, as mentioned earlier, for certiorari, prohibition, mandamus quo warranto, habeas corpus, and the 3 special rules, writ of kalikasan, writ of amparo, and writ of habeas data. Now, your case, let's say your case is already with the Court of Appeals and you lose again. Under Rule 45, the filing of an MR is no longer strictly required in view of Section 2. Upon receipt of the adverse decision or denial of motion for reconsideration, you go to the Supreme Court. But remember, as a general rule, you can only elevate the case to the Supreme Court under Rule 45 if you are raising a pure question of law. Now, so from the Court of Appeals, you file an appeal by petition for review on certiorari, not Rule 65. How many days do you have? You have 15 days. And again, this is extendable to 30 days, total of 45 days. So again, the same with the other courts, you file for a motion for extension plus payment of docket fees. Now, your case is with the Supreme Court. Earlier, we discussed that Rule 56 is divided into 2 parts: original jurisdiction and appellate jurisdiction. So Rule 45, it falls under appellate jurisdiction. Now, for Sandigan Bayan, under criminal procedure, particularly Rule 122 in relation to Rule 124, if the case is originally filed with the Sandigan Bayan, regardless of the penalty imposed, to elevate this to the Supreme Court, you file a notice of appeal plus payment of docket fees. Again, it must be done within 15 days. Now, what if the case involves a public officer below salary grade of 27? If that's the case, you file it with the RTC. So for example, suppose it is a plunder case involving a lower ranking official. If the RTC convicts from RTC to Sandigan Bayan, file a notice of appeal within 15 days. And then again, from Sandigan Bayan to Supreme Court, another notice of appeal within 15 days. However, if the penalty is below reclusion perpetua, from RTC to Sandigan Bayan to Supreme Court by Rule 45, raising a pure question of law is only allowed. So the mode of appeal depends on the penalty imposed. Now, let's go to Court of Tax Appeals. So, under the Mendez ruling, its jurisdiction covers cases involving 1 million pesos and above. If the amount is below 1 million, jurisdiction belongs to the MTC. Now, what if you want to elevate a case from the RTC to the Court of Tax Appeals? So the remedy is to file a petition for review within 15 days, extendable to 30 days. So 15 days, extendable um, to 30 days. So within the Court of Tax Appeals, there are 3 divisions. If you lose at the division level, the question is, can you directly go to the Supreme Court? The answer is no. You cannot go from Court of Tax Appeals directly to the Supreme Court. You must first go to the Court of Tax Appeals and Bank. So what you do is file a petition for review within 15 days. Then, if you lose again, you now go to the Supreme Court via Rule 45. So again, if it's a Rule 45 petition, it can only raise pure questions of law. And that concludes our appealing procedure for the regular courts. We now move on to the constitutional commissions. First is the Civil Service Commission. So if you lose in the Civil Service Commission, you may proceed with the Court of Appeals. The remedy is to file a petition for review within 15 days. Now, this is also extendable to 30 days. You can also file a Rule 45, so you can go directly to the Supreme Court. Again, only pure questions of law are allowed. Next is the Commission on Elections. So as mentioned earlier, it has 2 divisions. Now, what do you do in cases falling under Commission on Elections? If you lose in a division, the question is, can you go directly to the Supreme Court? The answer is no. It must first go to COMELEC and Bank before proceeding to the Supreme Court. And this is a mandatory rule. And after the NBank decision, you now go to the Supreme Court via petition for certiorari. So how many days? This is 30 days. And take note, this is non-extendable. Now, because the reason for this, it is simply provided by our Constitution. And the ground should be grave abuse of discretion. Before proceeding to the SC, you must first apply for a TRO, injunction, or a status quo ante order. So otherwise, if you fail to apply for any of these, the decision of the NBank is final and executory. So this was evidence in the case of Rosal versus Comelec, wherein no TRO was issued. So automatically, the decision of the NBank was executed. Finally, we go to Commission on Audit. So here, the Commission on Audit follows the 6 months and 5 days rule. So this rule, it provides that if no decision was issued, If no decision is issued within 6 months, you may elevate the matter. And if you lose, you can go from Commission on Audit to the Supreme Court. What do you file? You file a Rule 64 in relation to Rule 65 petition. How many days? Also 30 days. And the same with COMELEC, it is non-extendable. Again, the reason is because it is provided for by our Constitution. Again, before going to the Supreme Court, there is a requirement to file either a TRO, injunction, or a status quo order, ante order. Failure to do so results into having the decision of the commissioner proper as final and executory. The reason is because the Commission on Audit is the guardian of public funds. So that concludes the appealing procedure for both our regular courts and our constitutional commissions. And that is MOYA 3 by Dean Salvador Moya III. Thank you. Now let's move on to MOYA 4, which focuses on the provisional remedies, covering Rules 57 to 61 of the Rules of Court. When we say provisional remedies, these are temporary reliefs granted by the court. They are not final remedies. Instead, they are meant to protect the rights of the parties, preserve property, or secure the satisfaction of a possible judgment while the case is still pending. Let's begin with Rule 57. Rule 57 is writ of preliminary attachment, and this remedy is typically used in situations where, for example, a party leaves the Philippines with the intent to defraud creditors, or when there is a claim involving the recovery of money or property that is at risk. And then as to jurisdiction, if the amount involved is up to 2 million pesos and below, it falls within the Metropolitan Trial Courts. If it is 2.0 million plus 1, the jurisdiction falls under the Regional Trial Court. Here, the applicant is required to post a bond, and this bond is condition sine qua non. Its purpose is to answer for any damages that the adverse party may suffer, and the attachment is later found to be improper. As to enforcement, the writ of attachment is regional in character, meaning it's generally enforceable within the region of the issuing court. Next, we have preliminary injunction under Rule 58. The jurisdiction may be with both MTC and RTC, although in practice, it is more commonly handled by the RTC. Now, there are 3 types of injunction. Prohibitory injunction, which prevents a party from doing an act. Mandatory injunction, this compels a party to perform an act. And permanent injunction, this is the only one that may be granted as a main action, not merely provisional. The purpose of injunction is to preserve the status quo, or to protect the rights of the parties while the case is still ongoing. And similar to attachment, a bond is also required. It is also a condition sine qua non. So, a good illustration here is the case of GMA versus De Lima. In that case, former Gloria Macapagal Arroyo was allowed to leave the country for medical reasons upon posting a substantial bond, showing how injunction and bond requirements operate in practice. As to enforceability, like attachment, injunction is also regional in character. Now we go to Rule 59, receivership. So receivership is commonly applied in cases involving businesses or banks where there is a need to protect and preserve assets. In many instances, the Philippine Deposit Insurance Corporation or PDIC acts as the receiver for banks. Um, as for the jurisdiction, it is the RTC acting as a special commercial court or designated as a special commercial court. The same with the first two provisional remedies. A bond is also a condition sine qua non, and its purpose is to answer for possible damages. And just like the earlier remedies, its enforcement is also regional in character. Next is Rule 60 Replevin. Now this remedy is distinct from the others because it involves the recovery of personal property. And jurisdiction again depends on the value. If the value is 2 million pesos and below, it falls under the MTC. If above 2 million pesos, it is under the RTC. Now, what makes Replevin unique is the bond requirement. So as compared to the other remedies, the bond must be double the value of the property. And you may ask, why is that? So the reason is because the property involved is personal and movable. It can easily be transferred from one place to another. Let's say, for example, a machinery is to be transported from Caloocan City to Pasig City or elsewhere. So the higher bond is meant to offset the risk of loss, transfer, or damage. And because of the nature of the property, the writ of Replevin is enforceable anywhere in the Philippines, not just within a region. And finally, we have the support pendente lite under Rule 61. This refers to support granted while the case is ongoing, usually in family-related cases. Jurisdiction falls with the regional trial court acting as a family court. And unlike the other provisional remedies, no bond is required here. Another important point, the amount of support is not final. It can be adjusted, either increased or to be decreased depending on the needs of the recipient and the financial capacity of the one giving support. And because of its nature and importance, especially considering public policy and constitutional considerations, support pendente lite is enforceable anywhere in the Philippines. So to summarize, MOYA 4 covers provisional remedies which are temporary court measures designed to protect rights, preserve property, and ensure that any future judgment will not be rendered useless. This includes Rule 57, Attachment, Rule 58, Injunction, 59, Receivership, 60, Replevin, and 61 is support pendente lite. And that concludes MOYA 4. For our final discussion, we will be discussing MOYA 5, which is special civil actions. So for our final topic, we now move to MOYA 5, which covers special civil actions under the rules of court. And in this discussion, we will focus on different special civil actions, their respective jurisdictions, the parties involved, and each remedy and the legal questions or issues it seeks to resolve. So to start, a special civil action is still a civil case governed by the rules of court, but it is distinguished by unique procedures and specific requirements due to the particular nature of the subject matter involved. Let's begin with Rule 62, interpleader. So what is an interpleader? It is a remedy available to a person who holds property or is obligated to perform something but is faced with completing claims from two or more parties. So instead of choosing among the claimants, the holder brings them to court and compels them to litigate their claims against each other. As to the jurisdiction of interpleader, it depends on the value of the property or claim. It may fall under MTC or the RTC, and the parties involved are at least two adverse claimants, while the stakeholder remains as a neutral party. And the question and issue is who has the rightful entitlement to the property or obligation. Next is Rule 63, declaratory relief. This action is filed before any breach or violation occurs. Its purpose is to obtain a judicial determination regarding the validity, interpretation, or construction of a law, contract, will, ordinance, or other written instruments. Its jurisdiction lies exclusively with the regional trial court, and the case is initiated by a single interested party, but notice to the Office of the Solicitor General is mandatory. And the main question being resolved is what is the proper interpretation or validity of the legal instrument involved before any breach happens. Next is Rule 64 in relation to Rule 65. So this remedy concerns the review of final decisions, resolutions, or orders issued by the Commission on Audit and the Commission on Elections. So it is a special mode of review filed directly with the Supreme Court within 30 days. And the key issue is whether the Commission acted with grave abuse of discretion amounting to lack or excess of jurisdiction. Now for Rule 65, certiorari prohibition and mandamus, these are extraordinary remedies used to correct acts committed with jurisdictional errors or grave abuse of discretion. And they're not available when there is an appeal or any other plain, speedy, and adequate remedy in the ordinary course of law. So jurisdiction over these petitions is concurrent among the Regional Trial Court, Court of Appeals, Sandigan Bayan, Court of Tax Appeals, and Supreme Court. Now, however, this is subject to the doctrine of hierarchy of courts, meaning lower courts must generally be resorted to first before going to a higher or appellate court. A clear example is the case of De Lima versus Guerrero, where the petition was dismissed because it was filed directly with the Supreme Court, bypassing the lower courts. For certiorari and prohibition, the requirements are there is no appeal or other plain, speedy, and adequate remedy available, and there is grave abuse of discretion amounting to lack or excess of jurisdiction. And for mandamus, the key question is whether the duty involved is ministerial in nature and has been unlawfully neglected. Next is Rule 66, co-warranto. Co-warranto is it is a special civil action used to challenge a person's right to hold a public office or exercise a franchise. So jurisdiction may lie either with the Regional Trial Court, Court of Appeals, Sandigan Bayan, Court of Tax Appeals, or the Supreme Court, depending on the case. It may be initiated either by the Office of the Solicitor General or by a private individual who claims entitlement to the office. So, two important jurisprudence points. In Aguinaldo versus Aquino III, the court ruled that the Judicial and Bar Council cannot restrict the President's discretion in appointing officials by limiting the short list. In Republic versus Serrano, on the other hand, the court held that the one-year prescriptive period does not apply against the state in co-warranto cases. Thus, Quo warranto may involve eligibility in elective positions and the validity of appointment in appointive positions. We now proceed to expropriation. So expropriation is a legal process where the government takes private property for public use, subject to payment of just compensation as guaranteed by our Constitution. Now, for its jurisdiction, it depends on the value of the property, falling under either the MTC or the RTC in accordance with BP 129. So the parties involved are the state or government authority and the private property owner. Now, the central issue is determination of just compensation, which is a judicial function. There's also what is called inverse expropriation, where the private party initiates the case because the government has effectively taken the property without formal expropriation proceedings. Next is Rule 68, which is judicial foreclosure. Now, this is an action filed by a mortgagee to foreclose a mortgage property in order to satisfy an unpaid obligation. The jurisdiction again depends on the value of the property, so it's either MTC or the RTC. The parties involved are the mortgagor and the mortgagee. So the key concept here is equity of redemption, which allows the debtor to redeem the property within at least 90 days and up to 20 days depending on the rules applied. There is also the right of redemption, which is 1 year for natural persons and 90 days for juridical persons under the general banking law. Next is partition. So partition is a remedy used when co-owners or heirs are unable to agree on how to divide a property, thus requiring judicial intervention. Now, this should be distinguished from Rule 74, which allows extrajudicial settlement of estates when the parties agree and there are no outstanding debts. Thus, Rule 74 refers to an extrajudicial process, while partition is a judicial remedy. So its jurisdiction depends again on the value of the property. So it could either fall under MTC or the RTC. So the parties are co-owners or co-heirs, which is why it is several parties. And the central issue is the proper distribution of property among the parties entitled to it. Next, second to the last is ejectment cases, specifically forcible entry and unlawful detainer. In unlawful detainer, possession is initially lawful but becomes illegal due to expiration of the right to possess, such as termination of a lease agreement and failure to vacate. Enforceable entry, on the other hand, its possession is illegal from the very beginning because it was obtained through force, intimidation, threat, strategy, or stealth. And as a general rule, jurisdiction belongs to the MTC under the rules on summary procedure. However, if possession is already more than 1 year, the case becomes plenary and jurisdiction is transferred to the regional trial court. The only issue in ejectment cases is who has the better right to physically possess the property. And finally is Rule 71, contempt. Contempt may either be direct or indirect, and it refers to acts that disobey or disrespect the authority of the court or obstructs the administration of justice. Jurisdiction depends on the court. The MTC may impose up to 5,000 peso fine or 30 days imprisonment or both. RTC it may impose up to 30,000 pesos fine or 6 months imprisonment or both. Generally, there are two parties involved unless the court initiates contempt proceedings on its own motion. And the issue is whether or not defendant committed direct or indirect contempt. And that concludes MOYA 5, covering the full range of special civil actions under the rules of court.